Please, not that." The whisper was ragged, torn from her throat as the searing pain shot up her left leg, blooming like a dark, blinding flower behind her eyes. Patricia Williams could only focus on the grim, muddy face leaning over her, the man's expression a study in unwavering concentration. His hands, large and scarred from rough work, were surprisingly gentle as they probed the gash on her shin. The torrential rain had been falling for hours, a relentless assault that merged with the tears she couldn't stop. She was lost, hurt, and utterly disoriented, a million miles away from the manicured safety of her life in New York. "I know it hurts, Mom, but I have to stop the bleeding. It's deep." His voice was a low, steady rumble, anchoring her to the horrifying present. He worked with an almost disturbing competence, stripping a piece of his own worn flannel shirt to make a pressure bandage. Patricia was a mess. Her custom-made hiking gear, a silly extravagance for a flight she intended to take across the country alone, was ripped in several places, caked in mud and something darker she didn't want to examine too closely. "How long have you been out here?" he asked, his eyes the color of wet slate, meeting hers. She tried to think, but the memories were a fractured blur. The single-engine Cessna's engine sputtering, the control panel flashing a blinding red, the wind slamming the small aircraft down into the thick canopy of trees in this forgotten part of the Appalachian Mountains like a discarded toy. The crash, the scramble out, the endless walking. I don't know," she managed, the words catching in her throat. She was 37 years old, the principal owner and face of the Williams Sterling Luxury Hotel Group, a woman who commanded rooms and board meetings with a steely grace. Yet here she was, reduced to a trembling, wounded animal, dependent on a stranger. "My ankle is swelling badly. Can you wiggle your toes?" she tried, the simple action sending a fresh spike of nausea through her. "A bad sprain, possibly fractured. We have to get you out of this rain and back to my cabin." "It's maybe 2 miles from here," he said, the urgency in his voice rising. Who are you?" she asked, the question fueled by a flicker of fear. He was a mountain of a man, covered in mud and smelling of pine and honest sweat. "My name's David Garcia. I'm a wildland firefighter for the Forest Service, but I also run a small farm nearby. I was checking on some of my goats when I found your wreckage." He didn't wait for her permission, simply scooped her up with surprising ease, one arm supporting her back, the other beneath her knees. "Hold tight around my neck. It's going to be a rough walk." The journey was a brutal, agonizing sequence of jolts and searing pain. Patricia buried her face into the damp fabric of his t-shirt, biting down on her lip until she tasted copper to keep from screaming. She felt the steady, powerful rhythm of his heartbeat against her ear, a constant reassuring thrum in the chaos. His chest was solid, his steps careful and measured against the treacherous, slippery ground. She allowed herself to drift into the strange comfort of his strength. This man, a complete stranger, was risking the relentless storm and the slick terrain to save her, asking for nothing in return. A stark contrast to the life she'd left behind, where every interaction, every perceived kindness was carefully tracked on a mental ledger, always expecting a transactional return. "What do I call you?" he asked, his voice cutting through the painful haze. The question demanded an answer, a truth she wasn't ready to offer. If she said Patricia Williams, everything would change. He'd see the headline, the money, the empire, and the honest, raw connection they'd formed in the rain would vanish. He'd see the distance, the impossibility of their worlds. A sudden, defiant decision crystallized in her mind. "Just Pat. Nothing else," she replied, the shortened version a small, necessary lie, a temporary erasure of the weight of her billions. Pat. It sounded free, untethered. "Pat," he repeated, testing the sound, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "We'll get you fixed up, Pat. That's a promise." The sincerity of the promise stung her eyes, and she realized the tears that fell were not from pain, but from the sudden, unexpected feeling of being truly cared for. "Why are you doing this, David? Why risk yourself for a stranger?" she asked, the question scratching at her throat. His response was immediate, unwavering, and simple. "Because it's the right thing to do, that's all." Not because she was some important, recognizable figure. He didn't recognize the face that graced dozens of magazine covers. Not because he expected a reward, just because it was the right thing to do. The tiny cabin was a haven, a simple one-room structure built from logs, with a basic wood-burning stove radiating welcome heat. It contained a small kitchenette and a single narrow bed against the wall. A small rough-hewn table held a couple of mismatched chairs, and the shelves were lined with survival guides and worn books on regional history. David carefully placed her on the bed. The mattress felt lumpy and uneven, but the sheets, though rough, were surprisingly clean. "I need to clean that cut properly," he announced, already moving with purpose, retrieving a metal first aid kit from beneath the bed. "You're an EMT?" she asked, observing the familiar organization of the supplies. "Something like that. When you're a wildland firefighter and run a farm alone, you learn fast or things die," he replied with a wry smile. He boiled water and added a strong-smelling antiseptic, dipping a clean cloth into the steaming liquid. "This is going to burn," he warned. It was a lie. It didn't just burn. It felt like a branding iron had been pressed into her skin. She bit back a cry, her nails digging into the rough sheets. "Breathe with me. In through the nose, out through the mouth," he instructed, his voice low and hypnotic, guiding her through the ordeal. His hands worked with a delicate yet firm precision, cleaning the mud, the grime, and the surrounding ripped skin. He applied a thick antibiotic ointment and wrapped the wound tightly. Then came the ankle. He gently palpated the swollen joint, his touch contradicting the ruggedness of his hands. "No break, but a severe sprain. You'll be off it for at least 10 days. The roads are mud-clogged now. When they dry, I'll drive you into town to get a proper checkup." He fashioned a secure splint using strips of wood and more bandages. "There. Now you rest. When was the last time you ate?" She couldn't remember. A hurried, ignored breakfast in the hangar almost 3 days ago. "I'll make some soup," he said, moving to the small stove. "Wait, David." She stopped him, grabbing his sleeve. The fabric was cold and wet beneath her fingers. "Where will you sleep?" He paused, his expression serious but kind. "I have a small cot in the barn loft I use in the summer. It's dry enough. You need the bed, Pat. You need privacy and warmth." A lump formed in her throat. When had anyone last put her needs before their own, without a hidden agenda? "Thank you," she managed, the phrase feeling too small, too inadequate for the enormity of his generosity. "Rest. I'll check your temperature every few hours," he said, letting himself out and leaving the door ajar. She listened to the comforting sound of running water, the clatter of a pot, and the emerging, glorious scent of onions and broth simmering. Exhaustion dragged at her, but she forced her eyes open to study the room. It was sparse, everything serving a purpose. A few books, mostly on forestry and animal husbandry, a faded photograph of a younger David, and an older man, who must have been his father, standing proudly next to a pickup truck. No luxury, no pretense, just a life lived with intentionality. It was the antithesis of her sterile, expensive penthouse in Manhattan, where every piece of furniture had been chosen by a design firm for its cost and look, not its comfort or meaning. David returned with a steaming bowl of thick, hearty chicken and vegetable soup. Her hands shook uncontrollably when she tried to take the spoon, a delayed reaction to shock and cold. "Here, let me help," he offered, pulling the small chair closer. He fed her slowly, carefully, like a child. The soup was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted, pure warmth and nourishment sinking into her empty stomach. "You do this often? Rescue lost city folk?" she asked, a small, weak smile forming on her lips. "First time. Usually it's just my dumb goats wandering off," he grinned, a small, genuine flash of humor that made her heart flutter. "My luck, then. Or yours." He paused, his slate eyes holding hers. 5 minutes more, and you would have been facing severe hypothermia. It was our luck, Pat. The weight of his words sank in. She had been that close to dying. 72 hours of frantic searching by her staff, her board, and the authorities in the wrong place, guided by a deliberately false flight plan. She had been flying without a destination, simply escaping. "Do you have a phone? A satellite radio? I need to tell someone I'm alive," she asked, the corporate urgency resurfacing. She saw the flash of relief in his eyes, quickly masked. "No signal here. Just an old shortwave radio for emergencies. I can try to send a message to a local ham radio operator tomorrow, when the weather clears." "Tomorrow," she repeated, the single word buying her one more night of this strange, unburdened freedom. One more night as Pat, not Patricia Williams. Just before the exhaustion finally pulled her under, David covered her with a heavy wool blanket that smelled of clean soap and sunshine. "I'll be back in an hour to check your temperature. Shout if you need anything. I'll hear you from the barn." He lingered at the door, turning back just as she was closing her eyes. "Your last name, Pat. I need to know it for the radio message." The question hung in the quiet, charged air. Williams, CEO of the Williams Sterling Group, billionaire, face on the cover of Forbes, everything. I don't know if anyone is looking for me yet," she lied, the words tasting like ash. "The flight plan I filed was fake." It wasn't entirely a lie. They were looking in the wrong state. David simply nodded, his eyes searching hers, a look of quiet understanding, or perhaps a flicker of suspicion in their depth. "Okay then, just Pat it is. Sleep well." The door closed softly. Pat lay there, watching the rain hammer the window, knowing she had just crossed a boundary. Not a lie, no. A deliberate temporary omission. A serpent of guilt was beginning to coil in her stomach. The fourth morning dawned clear and glorious, washing the world in golden light, and Pat woke to the smell of strong coffee. She found she could sit up unassisted, a small victory, though her ankle still throbbed with a dull ache beneath the splint. The gash on her leg was slowly knitting, the angry red receding into a more manageable pink. "Morning," David said, standing by the doorway, 2 chipped mugs in hand. His hair was damp, his shirt a clean but well-worn blue denim. He must have showered in the rudimentary outdoor setup he had mentioned. He had a quick, genuine smile that still managed to disarm her. "You are a saint," she murmured, accepting the mug. The coffee was dark, robust and unsweetened. Perfect. He helped her ease herself out of the narrow bed, offering his solid shoulder as a crutch until she settled onto a chair near the window. Everything still felt difficult, but undeniably things were getting easier. "You need to stop thanking me," David insisted, leaning against the rough-hewn table, his arms crossed over his chest. "It's nothing extraordinary." "It is, though," Pat countered, looking out at the green hills painted gold by the morning sun. "You saved me, housed me, gave me your bed. Most people I know wouldn't lift a finger unless it benefited their bottom line." The irony of her own privileged circle was sharp. David surveyed the small cluttered cabin. "All right then, since you feel so useless sitting there," he conceded, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "There's a basket of clothes that need mending. Missing buttons, frayed seams. It's an easy job if you don't mind." He retrieved a large woven basket filled with several times mended durable work clothes. Pat picked up a thick denim shirt, noticing the neatly patched elbow. "You stitch your own clothes?" she asked, surprised by yet another facet of his self-sufficiency. "Have to. When you live this far out and on a budget, you learn to do everything yourself. Or you pay someone. And I don't have the cash to hire a tailor every time I snag a shirt," he stated plainly, without a trace of self-pity or embarrassment. Pat thought of the millions she had spent on designer clothes, many of which she'd worn only once before discarding. The contrast felt like a physical blow. "Teach me about the farm while I sew, then," she proposed, retrieving a spool of thread and a needle from the small sewing kit she'd found. David spoke for hours about the 90 acres that had belonged to his family for 3 generations. He talked about his herd of 50 cattle, a resilient, hardy crossbreed suited to the mountain climate. He spoke of his father, a man with the same granite jaw and honest eyes, who had died a sudden death 8 years prior while mending a section of fence. He never wanted another life. Born on this land, hoped to die on it. David's grip tightened briefly on his coffee mug. He got half of what he wished for. "And you never left?" Pat asked, guiding the needle through the stiff fabric. "I did. Went away for a year of college, studied forestry management in North Carolina. But when Dad got sick, I came home and I realized I didn't want to be anywhere else." He stared out the window at the distant green slope. "My friends in the city must have thought I was crazy." "They probably did," Pat admitted without meeting his gaze. "Especially the girlfriends. None of them wanted to trade air conditioning and city lights for a wood stove and an outhouse." He gave a crooked, self-deprecating smile. Pat dug her needle deep into the seam, focusing intensely on the stitch, trying to ignore the sudden rush of heat in her cheeks. They had no idea what they were missing. "And you, Pat?" he asked, the shift in focus catching her off guard. "What about your life in Philadelphia? The one you were running from?" She felt the familiar need to carefully calibrate her response. "I work in corporate strategy. Board meetings, endless office politics, that kind of thing," she said, carefully avoiding the word CEO. "It's complicated. There are parts I love, the strategy, the problem solving, but there's so much pressure, so many people telling you who to be. That's why I was flying alone into a storm, I guess, she confessed, the honesty escaping before she could filter it. I just wanted to breathe. David's quiet, intense gaze seemed to penetrate all her careful defenses. And the fiancé? He asked, pointing to the pale indentation on her left ring finger. She looked down. The white line where her 10-carat diamond had sat for 7 months was still visible. She'd removed the ring only a month ago, but the ghost of it remained. Ex-fiancé? We broke it off recently, last month. Another half-truth. She'd mentally ended things long before the paperwork was filed. I realized I was with him for all the wrong reasons, which were convenience, expectation, loneliness, not love, she admitted, concentrating on pulling the thread tight. David was silent for a long moment. And how do you know the difference? The question made her pause, the needle suspended in mid-air. How did she know? Because her ex-fiancé's touch had never made her skin tingle. Because their conversations had been dry, calculated transactions. Because after months of engagement, she couldn't recall a single moment he'd made her truly laugh. You know when you feel it, David, she finally said, meeting his eyes. Or more importantly, when you don't. The atmosphere in the room changed, thick with an unnamed tension. David abruptly pushed away from the table. I need to check the stock. I'll be gone a few hours. I'm going stir-crazy, just to the barn then. I need to use this leg, she pleaded, pointing to the makeshift splint. He hesitated, then sighed. Fine, but you lean on me the whole time. She rose, testing her weight. The pain was still there, a constant reminder, but manageable. He offered his arm and she took it, feeling the solid definition of his forearm beneath the fabric. They walked slowly, carefully, across the muddy yard. The barn was much larger than the cabin, clean and organized, with a comforting aroma of hay and livestock. He showed her his cattle, each one named, each with its own history. This one's Buttercup, he said, gently stroking the head of a pregnant cow. She's due in a few weeks. A tricky birth, maybe? My biggest investment in a few years. You love them, she observed, stating the obvious. They're family. Everything I have, he replied, the simplicity of his affection striking her. It wasn't about return on investment or market value. It was just love and connection. A distant thunder rumbled, and dark clouds began to gather, signaling another storm. We can wait it out here, David suggested, guiding her into the large, sheltered barn entrance. The first heavy drops began to fall as they reached the doorway, quickly escalating into a downpour that shrouded the hills in mist. They stood close, shoulder to shoulder, watching the rain and inhaling the damp, earthy air. Thank you, she said, leaning her head briefly on his shoulder. For what this time? He asked, his voice low. For not making me feel pathetic, for not judging the mess I am, broken and obviously running from something I won't explain. He turned to face her, his eyes dark with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. Why would I judge you, Pat? Everyone has ghosts. The way he said her name, so gently with such weight, felt like an intimate caress. Pat raised her hand, almost without conscious thought, and touched his jaw, rough with a day's growth of beard, warm and solid. His eyes darkened further, his breathing deepening. He leaned in, and she knew he was going to kiss her, felt the magnetic pull drawing them together. But David pulled back, taking her hand and gently lowering it. Pat, I need to know you're staying before I do something I'll want to keep doing. Her heart clenched in a painful vice. You're going back to Philadelphia when you're healed, to your life, your job, your world, he said, his eyes now sad but firm. And I'm staying right here. This is my place. He took a slow step back, creating a necessary painful distance. So before I let this happen, before I give in to this pull, I need to know you can commit to staying. For real. She opened her mouth, but no words came. How could she promise to abandon a billion-dollar legacy, thousands of employees, and the life she had been groomed for? He saw the hesitation, the conflict in her eyes. That's what I thought. So don't say anything yet. Just think, because I'm already falling for you, Pat, and I need permission to keep falling. The following week was a dizzying blur of shared chores, charged silence, and excruciating proximity. Pat's ankle improved enough for her to walk with the rudimentary crutch David carved for her from an old fence post. She learned to feed the chickens and muck the stalls, her soft hands gradually developing the first layer of calluses. One evening, David took her to a high ridge overlooking the valley to watch the sunset. See that deep valley there? he asked, pointing to a stretch of pristine wilderness. "A developer from New Jersey offered me $3.5 million for this property last year. Wanted to build a private luxury resort. I turned him down flat." Pat's stomach dropped. $3.5 million. It was a paltry sum compared to the deals she orchestrated daily, but an unimaginable fortune in his world. "You refused?" "Of course. Money runs out, Pat. You spend it, it's gone. What do you have left? But this land, this view, the satisfaction of creating something with your own hands. No one can buy that from you," he said, pulling her down to sit beside him on the grass. His words were sharp, unintended daggers that pierced her carefully constructed disguise. Rich men in the city have houses they never visit, cars they never drive. They have everything, but they own nothing that truly matters, he continued, throwing a piece of dried grass into the wind. "I've met city people who come up here, lost and searching for some authentic experience, willing to pay a fortune to spend a weekend playing farmer, and then they retreat back to their empty, comfortable lives." He was describing her, exactly her, fleeing her life to experience this, knowing her luxurious safety net was just a phone call away. "Maybe they envy what you have," she whispered, watching the sun disappear in a blaze of orange and purple. "Then why don't they stay? Why don't they choose this life for real?" he challenged, looking at her with a stark intensity that demanded honesty. "Because it's easier to buy the experience than to live the reality, easier to take a photo than to do the actual work. Real change hurts, Pat. It demands sacrifice. It's not an Instagram filter. It's waking up before dawn every day, choosing this hardship because it means something." He stood, offering her his hand. "My father always said, money buys comfort, but it doesn't buy peace. You can have the best mattress in the world and still lie awake all night, or you can sleep on straw and wake up rested." As Pat took his hand, their fingers intertwining naturally, a sudden distressed bleating pierced the evening air. Buttercup, David's prize cow, was in distress. "Something's wrong," David said, dropping her hand and sprinting down the hill toward the barn. They reached the stall to find the cow heavily straining, clearly in premature labor. David's face was taut with concentration. "It's coming too soon, and it's breached. I need to turn it, or we lose both." "Tell me what to do," Pat demanded, the corporate strategist's composure snapping back into place. David paused, looking at her with a mix of desperation and sudden trust. "This will be hard. It might take all night, and it might not work." "Then we start now," she insisted. The night descended into a grueling, bloody blur. Pat knelt in the straw, holding the distressed cow's head, talking to her in soft, steady tones, instinctively comforting the terrified animal. David was deep inside the stall, his face strained, his arms working in the darkness. "I need lubricant. Shelf, middle, green bottle," David yelled. Pat scrambled up, her splinted leg protesting, but her movements were quick, sure. She found the bottle, her hands steady as she passed it to him. Crisis revealed character, and the city heiress, who rarely dirtied her hands, was on her knees in the dirt, covered in animal blood and fluid, focused solely on the life at stake. "Almost. Got it. It's turning," David gasped, the muscles in his forearms bulging with the effort. Pat heard the cow's final heart-wrenching grunt, and then a sudden explosion of life. The calf slid out, small, wet, and perfectly formed. "He's alive," Pat whispered, the adrenaline draining out of her. David was already clearing the calf's airways, checking its breath. After a tense silence, the calf shuddered, shook its head, and let out a tentative, noisy sneeze. "We did it," David choked out, his voice thick with relief. He collapsed onto the straw, utterly spent. Pat fell to her knees, suddenly overcome, dissolving into sobs she couldn't control. Hey, it's okay now," David said, pulling her into a tight embrace, burying her face in his sweaty, blood-stained shirt. "It's okay. You were incredible, Pat. You saved them just as much as I did." She looked up, finding his eyes, deep slate, reflecting genuine admiration, and then he finally kissed her. It wasn't gentle or a question. It was the sudden, raw culmination of weeks of pent-up need, a desperate, consuming kiss that tasted of sweat, salt, and relief. When they broke apart, breathless, he murmured against her neck, "I'm falling. I need to know where you stand." She pulled him back, her voice firm. "No more talking. Just stay with me now." They found their way to the small bed in the cabin as the first hint of dawn painted the sky pink. Their passion, born of shared risk and undeniable connection, was intense, raw, and comforting. They were honest in their need for the first time. Later, tangled in the worn sheets, his arm wrapped tightly around her, David spoke into the quiet morning. "I'm in love with you, Pat. No games. I need to know if you mean it too." Pat closed her eyes, tears of pure happiness burning the corners. "I love you too, David. I've never felt anything like this before. It terrifies me." It terrified her because the end was inevitable, because every minute with him made the coming fall more painful. But she didn't tell him that. She just pulled him closer, memorizing the feel of his skin, the scent of him, the steady rhythm of his heart. Only 2 more days until the roads dried out enough for him to take her to town. 2 more days before the real world shattered this perfect bubble. She knew she had to tell him the whole truth soon, but how could she destroy the one pure, real thing she had ever known? "I'm sorry," she whispered into his sleeping form. "I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to be honest from the beginning."